We are seeing a tremendous surge in this nasty pest, and get this, it's even harder to control than the Varroa destructor mite is. It snuck into our country down in Florida in 1998. Get that, it's been here almost 2.5 decades. It's a small hive beetle, and I believe this small hive beetle is going to get worse and worse in the upcoming year. And why do I believe this is going to become even a worse problem? Two reasons. Number one, thankfully there's a lot more of you now keeping bees. More and more people are getting into beekeeping. But number two, there are more and more companies than ever that are creating more things for bees to eat, more nutrition to give your bees. And get this, why is that important? Small hive beetle love nutrition. Now we have to add nutrition to our bees, I get that, but we have to be smarter in how we deal with the small hive beetle. Let's talk about the problem, then we'll try to solve it. Number one, small hive beetle is very sneaky, very covert, and it's underestimated, especially by new beekeepers. Number two, most management approaches and treatments are essentially not very effective. And number three, a lot of beekeepers are experiencing weaker colonies. Maybe they're new beginners, they don't know how to keep their hives strong, and weaker colonies are attracting small hive beetle and allowing the small hive beetle to reproduce. Let's face it, it took years for beekeepers to really understand that the Varroa destructor mite is a huge problem. I remember trying to spend a decade and a half trying to teach new beginners to please deal with your Varroa destructor mite, and many of them just wouldn't. But that's finally changing. Now, more and more people understand you got to deal with mites. Now we need to take a look at beetles. We really need to deal with the small hive beetles. And by the way, leave a comment below if you are dealing with small hive beetles. Let us know where you live and what the small hive beetle population is in your hives. Are you seeing a bunch? Big infestation? Are you just seeing a few or none at all? Let me know in the comments. So just like the Varroa destructor is a parasite, came into our country, surprised us, we had to deal with it. Get this, small hive beetle, it actually is a parasite to the bee colony as well. And it's time that we give it our full attention. We keep getting all these things introduced into the US that are bad for our bees. If you go back to the 19th century, about 1840 to 1850, we had the introduction of the wax moth. Yeah, believe it or not. And then about 1987, we had the introduction of Varroa destructor mite. And it's horrible for our bees. And then bring us up to date to 1998, we had the introduction of the small hive beetle. It's crazy. Now, a little side note here, Australia has been dealing with mites in the last year or so. And you may have heard the news where they've been trying to burn all the hives in order to kill the Varroa destructor mite. They finally just gave that up and said, okay, we're gonna have to learn to live with the Varroa destructor mite. But in Australia, the small hive beetle was actually entered that country in the early 2000s. So it's kind of the flip of what happened in the US. In the US, we had the Varroa destructor first, and then I think about 12 years later, we had the introduction of the small hive beetle. Whereas in Australia, they had the small hive beetle, and then what, 23 years later, they had the introduction of the Varroa destructor mite, kind of a flip-flop there. Now, typically most beekeepers open up their hive, they see a few small hive beetles, they go to smash some with their hive tool. It's just a, boom, boom, boom. It's a good feeling, right? But there's always some that probably get away because you don't want to kill your bees, you don't want to smash a bee with your hive tool. Now think about this, it's kind of a fun game to play, right? You think, okay, I got a few, I cut the numbers down, it's all good. But what if the one that got away, or some that got away, was a female? Well, get this, the female small hive beetle can lay up to 2,000 eggs in a beekeeping season. That's a tremendous amount of egg laying. It's going to produce a lot more small hive beetle. So every time you see a beetle that gets away, and I see one, I get worried. Oh my gosh, I hope that wasn't a female reproductive small hive beetle, because if it was, she's going to go lay hundreds of eggs immediately, just all throughout my hive. Now she's going to lay those eggs in the pollen, on top of the pollen, or maybe with her ovipositor, she'll cut open some brood and actually lay it into cap brood cells, and they will start to develop. After 3 days, the egg hatches into a larva, a small hive beetle larva. That larva is the problem. All the small hive beetle larvae in the hive just begin to eat everything. Literally, they eat everything. They eat the pollen, they eat the honey, they even eat bees or brood, everything. And they just devour it. They have a yeast. They produce a yeast that as they're worming their way through your colony, they're actually getting all this yeast carried out all through your hive, and it becomes so gross. Now, this yeast actually causes all of this honey of yours just to become what beekeepers have named slimed. It's slime. You can actually see this liquid, smelly, gross looking stuff start oozing out of your hive. That's how bad it is. And the larvae just run around, wandering around, eating everything. This is called the wandering stage of that small hive beetle larvae. It lasts about 7 to 10 days. It's a larvae, and then it goes out of your hive, just throws itself off of the bottom board, and it burrows down into the soil around your hive. The larvae actually go down around probably 3 inches or a little bit more, 3 to 6 inches into the ground, and there they begin to pupate. They are in the ground about 3 to 4 weeks, not quite a month. So you can see how fast they can reproduce. As soon as the larvae goes into the ground, 3 to 4 weeks later, they emerge as a new adult beetle, ready to go back into your hive again, flying right back in with their little wings, fly back in there and start devouring your bees and your hive again. Yeah, and by the way, beetles can fly. A lot of people don't realize they can fly. If you have beetles, you've seen them fly. As soon as you go to smash one, it flies away. But get this, they can fly a long way. Some people say they can even detect or smell or sense where hives are and fly to the weaker colonies up to 30 miles. So in your area, if you have some bees in a tree, an abandoned house somewhere, an old building, if you have bees in there, more than likely they have small hive beetle in there. And if you live close enough to that hive, or if you have somebody in your area within 30 miles that isn't really taking care of their small hive beetle, guess what? They have beetles, and those beetles are gonna find where your hives are, and they're gonna move in. I've had many beekeepers tell me that they saw a few beetles, they killed a few, they didn't think it was a big deal. Next month, they were just overrun with small hive beetle. And when the conditions are right, maybe hot, more humid weather, those beetles just go to town, and if you let them get out of control, then it can ruin your entire colony. Finally, once they slime your honey and that stuff is oozing and it smells bad, your bees will abscond. That means all your bees are going to leave and abandon the hive. So beware the expansion, the rapid growth of small hive beetle in your apiary, whether you have one hive or a bunch, it is just staggering. In fact, from the egg to the adult small hive beetle only takes about 30 days. That's how fast they can reproduce and just make more and more of these, with one beetle producing nearly 2,000 eggs in 1 year. So in just a little over 30 days, you can go from just a few beetles to a real serious infestation of small hive beetles that you can't get a handle on. That's the problem. Let's talk about the solution. What can we do about this? Let me give you some bullet points, okay? Number one, you don't want to over super. If you have a lot of room in your hive, you have a bunch of supers on your hive, the bees aren't able to go up there and protect it against small hive beetle. And so small hive beetle can have basically a free day up there just to roam around, lay a bunch of eggs in an abandoned honey super where there's few or very little bees in that super. Number two, be concerned about protein patties or pollen patties. What happens a lot of times is that these small hive beetles love to lay their eggs in these protein patties. And so if you're going to use pollen patties, you need to be very careful that you only use a small amount at a time, where the bees can kind of police the small hive beetle off of those pollen patties while they consume it. If you give them a whole bunch of nutrition like that at once and the bees can't cover it or eat it pretty quickly, then the small hive beetle can very easily lay eggs. Number three, strong colonies really does help a lot. If your hive is really populated well, then they are better able to control the small hive beetle. Small hive beetle do prefer weak colonies that are maybe sick from other things. And number four, keep your bee yard picked up. If you're out there working on your hive, don't leave frames of pollen or honey leaned up against a hive when you're done. Don't scrape out comb and just throw it out in the yard or something. All of these things can really lead to small hive beetles being attracted to your location. So don't do that. Keep your yard very tidy, clean, and don't attract small hive beetles. And number 5, be sure if you do have a hive that collapses or dies or absconds or something, take care of that hive immediately, that dead out. Don't leave it in your yard. Maybe it has some pollen in it. Maybe it has some honey in there. The bees are all gone. And guess what's going to happen? There's going to be small hive beetle that fly in there, start laying their eggs in that abandoned hive. Has no bees in it. So if you lose a hive, be sure and clean it up. Get that hive out of your bee yard, freeze the comb, and store that hive away where beetles can't get in there until you're ready to use it again. Also, always try to keep your hives in direct sunlight. It helps so much to reduce the beetles. Now this year, I moved some of my hives up into a shaded area for filming. I thought it'd be a lot better for me, not have to be out in the hot sun, better images for my camera. I fought beetles a lot more. I think I'm gonna have to move them back in the sun. What can beekeepers do to cut down on small hive beetle? Here's the thing, always stay ahead of the small hive beetle. Don't let them outrun or overpopulate your efforts to keep them down. Number 1, you need to use traps. Now there's a lot of different kind of traps. You've seen me make videos of the beetle blaster traps. These are oil-based traps. I use vegetable oil. They go between frames, and that's a way that bees will run these beetles down into these oil traps, and the beetles will actually die in the oil. There's another trap known as the West trap. The West trap is a large pan that fits under usually a screen bottom board. It sort of sits up on a shim a little bit. And when the beetles run down out of the hive, like they do on very hot days, they will run down through the screen and get into that oil and die. There's other types of oil traps too. One popular one is called the hood trap. And there's kind of some knockoffs, but oftentimes there's traps that and I've used them on my videos here, but they're kind of a clear trap that you can open the middle section up and actually put some bait of choice. Like you could put some protein powder, some a pollen patty piece in there, or apple vinegar or something like that. And that's a smell that will attract these small hive beetle. And then you put oil on the other side and you put it between your frames. And that way the bees will run those beetles into these traps, and the beetles are attracted to that smell. Now there's always things that you can put on the ground around your hive. One popular thing that a lot of beekeepers enjoy is nematodes. Now you can buy nematodes, you can look for it online, just do a search for small hive beetle control with nematodes, and you can actually purchase nematodes. It comes in a little bag and you buy those. I believe you mix them with water and then you kind of pour them around your hive. What nematodes are microscopic worms that actually just destroy grubs like the small hive beetle larvae that's pupating in the soil. There's a couple of different brands or types that work better, so be careful about that. Just make sure it says small hive beetle control. But these nematodes aren't a bad idea, but here's the thing about nematodes, and also diatomaceous earth that kind of slices up the larvae as they're in the ground. These things are almost too late to the fight. In other words, if you have beetles so bad, so populated in your hive that the larvae now are jumping out and pupating in the ground, you're trying to kill them in the ground, but the problem is you're not dealing with them in the hive. You want to control them before they turn into larvae and jump out. But hey, if you have a problem and it's real severe, then you got to go and kill the ones in the soil too. There's been a lot of new inventions here lately. And to be honest with you, I haven't tried all of these. I've been following them and seeing what people say. And by the way, all of these have mixed results. They really do. I got a lot more to share with you. But let's talk about the beetle baffles, I believe they're called. It's a little piece of thin metal that's either built in or goes onto your bottom board. And supposedly the small hive beetle, when they try to climb up from the bottom, they can't go around this sharp piece of metal. They can't walk around the corner, so to speak. But unfortunately, like I said earlier, beetles are really good at flying. They can just walk to the middle of your bottom board and fly up onto frames and dodge the areas where that thin piece of metal is. But again, it probably would help a little bit. One of the popular things that we hear more and more beekeepers say they like are the Swiffer sheets. These are like dryer sheets. They're kind of real microscopic fibers that kind of grab the little feet of the beetles and they get trapped in there. And there's a whole lot of different kinds that you can buy. You can go to Amazon and buy them. You can buy them from beekeeping stores. And these do seem to work pretty well for a lot of beekeepers. Just for a side note though, when I've tried them, you have to be very careful to stay after it because the bees will want to pull them out of the hive, especially if you use the smaller ones that most beekeeper stores sell. These small ones are going to get torn up by your bees really quick. So you almost have to staple them down in the corners of your deep hive bodies or wherever your beetles might be, your honey supers or something. Staple them down so your bees can't drag those out. And again, I think the bigger they are, the better. The small ones are just going to get torn up so easy and it just won't catch as many beetles. Now, they don't really kill the beetles. In my experience, I still have to take them off and start smashing beetles. Most of them just get trapped there. And it's pretty high intense labor to control them, but hey, it does work. Now, if you have a really big problem with small hive beetle and they're all in your hives and they're just, you can't control them, one of the things that a lot of beekeepers do have to go to, it's the big guns, but it is called Guard Star Perithrum. And this is a chemical that you drench the soil around your hives with, and this chemical will destroy any developing, pupating small hive beetle in the soil. So these things that I'm telling you about, they do work. Now this is very toxic. It will also kill your bees. Guard Star will. You don't want to put it in one of those pressurized sprayers because the spray can actually go up into your hive. You want to always keep it in a liquid form and use something like those water gardeners that kind of just pour things out. And you want to use that to pour it around your hive. But most bee stores actually carry Guard Star. Other beekeepers are starting to use things like Scott's Grub EX and to control the grubs, the small hive beetle larvae in the ground as well. And a lot more research is being done with this and finding that it really doesn't hurt bees. Now, two more things I want to tell you about to help you control small hive beetle. And before I do, let me encourage you to please subscribe. It means so much to me when you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel here. And always join me for my live stream every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. Now, two more ways that I want to talk about in dealing with small hive beetle really quick here is that you can actually buy things that go into your entrance. You can reduce your entrance. They're little gadgets that go into your entrance. And so when the beetles go in, they can't enter the hive. They're forced to go through these little holes instead of just flying straight in, and they're trapped. So there's a lot of different things coming out on the market today dealing with the entrance that may really help us control small hive beetles. So be sure and check these out. And finally, if it's just started to be noticed in your hive and these beetles are annoying, but you don't have that many, this is the best way to do it. It is the Hive Tool. Now, this is the combination of a J-hook hive tool and a smasher. Oddly enough, we had this hive tool long before beetles entered into the country. This smasher is a scraper actually, but it actually works good to smash small hive beetle. So always keep your hive tool handy when you open up a hive. Look at that top cover, flip it upside down as you take it off and see if there's small hive beetle on there. And if there is, you need to start smashing. Just start thinking in your head, oh my gosh, every one of these beetles that I see is a female ready to lay 2,000 eggs. And so you just want to take every one of them out. That's as plain as it is. But here's the thing. I really do feel it's going to get a lot worse in the next few years. Combination that we're having more beekeepers, especially new beekeepers getting into beekeeping, and sometimes new beginners aren't really all that vigilant about controlling things like small hive beetle. But secondly, all of us want to give our bees better nutrition, and that added nutrition is attracting and helping small hive beetle to expand in our colonies. But on the other hand, there's already a lot of nutrition in there, such as pollen, bee bread, honey, that's already in the hive as well, that's going to be attracting our beetles even if we don't feed them. Unfortunately, small hive beetles do overwinter with the cluster, so you'll have to fight them next year. If you're going to start out new next year, with a new package or a 5-frame nucleus or something like that, please start dealing with small hive beetle immediately. Assume that you have them, put your traps out, keep watching, stay ahead of the game with all the tips I gave you today, and you'll probably have a good chance of keeping them under control. Hey, I wonder how small hive beetles are over at Nature's Image Farm with Greg Burns. Greg made a video with me interviewing me about my YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, I'd love for you guys to see it. You get a little different side of me. Here it is right here. Check the video out. I'll see you guys over there.